Hey everybody. We've got two 20-minute talks to squeeze in right here before the next break, so we're going to go ahead and get right started. Next up is Jake Welch from Microsoft. He's going to be talking about service roasts and how they work.
Hi everyone. I'll give everybody a minute to just settle and then we'll get started. Okay, so as Kasky said, we're going to talk about service roasting. We found, I guess, at Microsoft in some cases, we've found some resistance from devs in kind of opening up the kimono and engaging in candid conversations that are necessary to kind of move the service forward. So this is a method that we've developed over the last year, which provides us a kind of a safe environment in which we can discuss services and the issues with the service developers. All right, so we're going to run through a really simple example of how a service may grow over time. Let's say you developed a social network on your own or something. Your user base is extremely small, so you start with a single server. As your user base grows, the single server can't cope, so you add a second server. No problem. So you become much more popular than you expected, so you start optimizing. You kind of determine that it's a little more work than you expected it to be, so you add a second developer. And then, okay, now we're getting somewhere. It's starting to look like an actual service rather than just something that somebody threw together. And you add a few more people, you split into teams. You can definitely make some progress now. You add a little more complexity with some more teams. And then a little bit more. And now you've basically introduced some accidental complexity into your service. So you obviously didn't plan this from the beginning, and so a lot of this is just things that have organically grown over time. You have some circular dependencies that are marked in red on the chart. These are not obviously very well understood. So now effectively throughout this cycle, teams are going to optimize their processes, procedures around what works best for them in that moment. Often these practices don't scale well or they don't take advantage of optimizations from others. This can lead to very different capabilities and maturity throughout the different teams. Okay, so then we add SRE to the mix. In our case, we've attached the team to identify their current state and see where we can help. So we ask information for the service, but it turns out no one has updated that in a while, so we get this. It's pretty close, right? In reality, the service really more looks like this again. So we're ways away from where we actually are, and obviously there's not a lot of documentation that really helps with that. And so with this process, then, I guess we can really only go up from here. So welcome to the pit of opportunity. You can thank Kasky for that one. So our goal with this is to build a relationship with the team and learn the product so we can help. We obviously can't do this without them, as the product teams inherently know their product the best and where the dead bodies are buried within the service. We needed to create a safe environment where service issues could be discussed and move this conversation forward. This is where service roasting comes in. The name is a play on the Friars Club comedy roasts and implies a good-natured conversation. This is one of the tools we use to establish a safe environment to discuss issues which could otherwise be contentious. We'll be discussing how to leverage this model with your services to uncover and document improvement opportunities. So our goal is to gain understanding of the service and identify shortcomings in a manner that teams feel comfortable with. In our roast series, we typically cover the entire service from source control to deployment to disaster recovery. And improvement opportunities are identified, and which makes a great shared backlog between both SRE and dev that both teams can work against. This is great for both newer or established services, and that includes services that might have been developed by SRE, services that are internal or services that are external to facing customers. At this point, you might be asking, why would I do this? I have an onboarding process or a checklist already. We found this to be an excellent way to build relationships and more importantly, trust between the teams. In our experience, everyone gains insight about the service, including pieces that are often ignored or forgotten, and allows fixing before an outage occurs. We've watched many times as dev managers have had kind of aha moments where they gain a better understanding of the details of how their service is actually implemented versus how it was designed. This process also gives sufficient context for SRE to help execute against that shared backlog of improvements. To run through the process across the entire service is a pretty significant time investment across both SRE and the product teams and requires dedication on both sides. In our experience so far, this takes approximately 10 hours of meetings for moderate-sized complex services. The meetings are performed across a series of weeks, but have been well worth the investment for both the SRE as well as the dev teams. So this isn't something that just SRE is gaining insights from. We initially started with 1.5 hour meetings. We found that 45 minutes is kind of more the sweet spot of what's more appropriate. Anything longer, you start to get teams to have emotional fatigue, and you start to have more kind of terse conversations. People get frustrated with each other, and overall, that's just less fruitful in the end. It's better to take more time over a series of weeks than it is to do this all in one go. If the topic does take longer, though, we do split that into multiple sessions as necessary. So some things might be 2 or 3 sessions. The tone of the conversation is really, really important to having a successful roast. It's important to have a common understanding of the purpose of the meetings and the value to each team before starting. How questions are phrased makes a huge difference in the direction of the conversation. How versus why is the difference between an onboarding meeting and a roast in a safe environment. Most importantly, we're not here to attack the service or the choices made, but to learn and ultimately make the service better overall. For example, why did you take a dependency on X when they have a 2.9 SLA? Could become something more like, what happens when dependency X fails, and then how does your service handle this? Or why did you build a giant monolith that takes 3 years to build and deploy? Could become, what prevents you from deploying several times per week? It's important to avoid questions that appear to attack, and instead ask questions which aim to clarify, identify insights, and ultimately fixes for the service. When we started the roast, we effectively only had SRE and product teams involved. We've quickly found that an impartial moderator helps significantly in keeping teams on task and to manage the conflict, any conflict that might arise rather. For example, we were on the 3rd discussion with a team, where other discussions had previously been healthy. When we began to drill into some of the core architectural pieces of the service, it became clear this was a really touchy topic. There was some things in there that they weren't proud of, that they didn't like. And so the room quickly became hostile. We wanted to know more, they didn't want to share more, they were being kind of protective of those things. The moderator in this case was actually able to halt the conversation, de-escalate it, and reset expectations, which allowed the conversation to continue. This avoided needing to cancel the meeting and basically stop the conversation, and or worse, harm the relationships between the teams. The Roastmaster is best as a person who's not otherwise involved in the engagement. We've run this with an involved Roastmaster, but found it works best if they are impartial. Their job is to feel out the room by tracking body language, tone, and perspective of questioning. By doing this, they can de-escalate, and if needed, call off the meeting entirely. We have called off meetings early, as this was the best course of action, and it helped prevent harm to the overall engagement and trust between the teams. The moderator also helps to keep conversations on track. If someone veers wildly off topic, the moderator can direct this to a new session to allow completing of the current topic. We can't really stress enough the importance of this role. It's really very critical to being successful throughout the engagement. Without this, you do end up with some pretty difficult conversations that are tough to continue. The meetings work best if you choose a single area and dive deeply into them. Subject matter experts are invited to provide an overview, and this might be something where they provide like an architectural diagram, they do whiteboarding, they do something similar to that. They cover pretty much all aspects of the service from their perspective as much as they can. This is actually an interactive session, so something that the teams, it's not a presentation per se. It's something where the teams will go back and forth and ask more questions and dive into specific pieces of the service itself. This helps to really fully cover an area, particularly pieces that typically would not be readily discussed. So if you're in a presentation style, obviously it's going to be something that they dictate exactly what they want to say. That's not what we're going for. We're going for a conversation about how the service actually works and functions. If the conversation does go into the weeds and it's something that needs to come back, the moderator can suggest scheduling additional time for an area in a future meeting. This helps ensure sufficient time to cover the intended area and really focus on that thing and give it everything that it needs to be successful. So as stated in the beginning, the intent from our service roast has been to understand the service from top to bottom. This slide provides good starting points for topics for nearly any service. This is roughly the order we've used in the past when we've been setting up these meetings and have found it to be a good walkthrough. Some of these topics may require 2 or 3 meetings, that's fine. Some of them may require more, some of them may be combined. It differs depending on the service itself. If you think this is of use in your organization, this is a good slide to take a photo of. Just wait a second. Okay. At the end of each meeting, a new topic is chosen for the next meeting. A candid conversation is then had about what went well and what could have gone better so that you're not making the same mistakes meeting after meeting. This process is really important to ensure productive conversations in the future. The scribe is accountable for ensuring participants have easy access to the outcomes of the meeting. This may include interesting insights, changes for future topics, and improvement opportunities that ultimately become bugs. At the end of the series, a final conversation is had to discuss prioritization and urgency of completing identified opportunities as part of the shared backlog. There are a few more things to consider when executing a service roast. It's fine to have conversations stay in the room as long as the fix is recorded. This allows teams to provide more information than they typically may feel comfortable with, and is important to establish that safe environment that's important for these conversations. You should expect that each service is going to be at a different maturity level in each area, but really avoid comparing any 2 services to each other. It's fine, however, to connect solutions between teams. For example, if Team A has a great library that solves a key bin packing problem that Team B is having, connect them together and get them to talk to each other about how they might be able to solve that jointly. Lastly, really important, if the teams are having a conversation amongst themselves, the developers, don't stop the conversation, listen to it harder. These are often the most interesting pieces of the entire conversation because of the things that are obviously not well understood within the development teams. So it's good to let those conversations happen. So in summary, we believe this is actually a pretty fantastic tool to use whether or not you're in a successful SRE organization or trying to establish one. To work properly, it's necessary to establish a safe environment, set the tone of the conversation, and perform multiple short meetings. We found that the Roastmaster is a critical role and improves the success rate of the meetings. So I'm happy to take any questions anybody might have.
So, I have a question about the personal aspects, because saying these things, I understand that you need to be very careful if you are roasting a service. Mm-hmm. What are the key takeaways of preventing from damaging relationships? Because you've talked about it, but it's more difficult to do this in practice,
yeah.
I'd say.
Yeah, so actually the moderator, this is where the Roastmaster is really important, because the key to selecting somebody who's a good Roastmaster is somebody who has good conflict management skills. And so you want to pick up on those things really early on during the conversations, and so you're stopping it before it becomes something where people are yelling at each other and causing those problems, and then calling it off. And that's where that escape hatch of call off the meeting if necessary is the right thing to do in some cases, just because it's not possible to recover the conversation after that point.
Well, isn't the damage then already done if you need to actually cancel the meeting because everyone sees that?
Not necessarily. Most people are, once you get people, if you've got 2 people who are fighting at each other and you stop them and say, hey, let's just settle down and relax, most people will come back from that and are like, okay, yeah, we kind of overreacted to that, and it was something that they reflect back on and are actually okay with. Obviously, if you let it go too far, then I think it does cause damage and problems with the relationship. But that's where you have to reset those expectations again and just say, hey, we're not here to cause problems with or to attack each other and to attack the service. We're here to have a candid conversation and get better. And so having that context up front and then reinstating that when you're actually having the conversation really helps people. And most people are pretty reasonable for that, in our experience at least.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
Hi, thanks for the talk. How do you identify when to do this roasting sessions? I mean, it's a huge amount of investment, right? Like 10 hours for a lot of people. So
yep.
As I can imagine, okay, whatever, we have over 1,000 people and a few hundred services.
Yep.
So how do you come up, and how often did you do this roast meeting yourself or in your organization?
Yep. So we choose it based off of where we actually have the engagements. In many cases, these are the teams that we're working with initially. You probably saw Greg's chat this morning, or his presentation this morning. We're really engaged with only a handful of teams at this point. And so when we go and engage with those teams, we'll sit down with them, have the conversation. If this is something that we believe is necessary, then we'll do it. And usually it's something that's actually really helpful, both for us as well as for the development teams to go through. So it's something that 10 hours actually in the end of it is not really that big of an investment when you're talking that you're probably going to have a relationship with this team that's more than a year. It's something where you identify those right things to fix, and so you can all get faster and better as you go. That's kind of that virtuous cycle of going faster. You identify that as part of this. It helps level set everything. Otherwise, you're just kind of fumbling through this over a long period of time, and it makes it more difficult.
So it's more or less mandatory for this SRE team
I wouldn't say
relationship for you?
It's not mandatory per se, but it's something that it helps significantly.
Thanks.
Yeah.
How do you see roasts fitting in with things like retrospectives and postmortems of incidents?
Sorry, can you repeat it?
How do you see roasts fitting in with things like retrospectives and postmortems following MIs and HSI type incidents?
So this typically happens before you're engaged in the postmortem process with the teams. Obviously, once you have that relationship and engagement, you're probably involved in that process from that point forward. The very last thing actually on the list of this list is to go through past outages and postmortems. And one thing that you get a lot of really great learnings from those things. And sometimes we do that offline, and sometimes we'd actually do it and have a conversation about some of the things that we've read or some of the things we've gone through. I don't see it as fitting in post kind of the engagement beginning. You could do this again, 2 years after engaging with the team to kind of level set again, and obviously it would be a lower time investment, but I don't see it otherwise it's probably being applicable.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay.
Jake, thank you.